Did you see my email regarding global automotive industry pipeline?
Yeah. These are captured in HubSpot. So I just did the two. I might need to do some updates, but yeah, I've got them captured in the recent conversion field.
Yeah, but my sense is that if there are additional leads that they're working, like lead contact names that they're getting engagement around to try to schedule an interview or a meeting, we might want to try to actually capture that in HubSpot.
So they've been very
careful about that.
Secretive, discreet. They will not give us we've agreed on companies for them to go out to. They won't give me a name of who they're going out for, and they won't give us like who's engaged with the podcast or articles, which is something Dan asked for originally.
Well, if they're actively trying to schedule a meeting or they've gotten interest and they're just scheduling, like that zone should be shared.
Okay.
I get the rest of it.
Right. Yeah, but I need to make some updates. I don't have all these captured that Leslie noted.
Yeah, because if we can capture those as net new SQLs or even SQL provokes, that's a huge, progress statement,
Hi, Bhupinder.
Hey,
hi, Bhupinder.
How are you?
You're doing very well. How are you, sir?
Hi there.
Doing well.
So Fitbit's in the news. All your China plans are like headline news.
Just the intention, I think, not the plans, I hope.
Well, yeah, but still, it's funny because I feel like, your intentions are just becoming more visible, but everyone's doing it. You know what I mean? Like, you're not alone.
True. Everybody is also trying to minimize the disruption and, do the minimum required. So all kinds of stuff going on everywhere, right?
Absolutely. It's like every creative idea, I'm sure, has been tried, right? Transshipments and postponement of packaging and everything,
The thing is, this is not about, a set of rules that we want to, find our ways around. This is about an intent. This whole thing in the last few months has been an intent. So even if a lot of companies find ways to work around it, as soon as, there's a bigger realization, okay, shit, this is what our intention was and this is what we achieved. Those things can be changed. These are administrative interpretations. They can be changed. They can be changed overnight.
Right.
And we'll have to still scramble.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I thought it was interesting to just see that come out, and then the sort of like the absence of similar news from everyone else, really. You know what I mean? It's like, because it's all of tech that's got significant ODM, JDM exposure and or other other direct impacts. It's there's these war room environments going on across all of our customer base. It's just, no one's really publicly talking about it too much. It's more of just, in the executive peer networks, everyone comparing ideas. But anyway, I wish you all the best going through the super dynamic time that you're dealing with right now.
We have it under control.
Good. Excellent. So since our last call, we followed up with the presentation that Kevin did from last year, and then a little bit more information on NPI. And I thought what might be good is to capture your thinking here on this call. We're more than happy to kind of, try to build out visualization of that or the storyline that we kind of talked through a little bit. I don't know if you've even had a chance to kind of collect your thoughts based on our last call in any more detail, but I thought we'd start there.
No, so the answer to that is no, but what I did, so I think after our last call, which was last Wednesday or something.
Yeah.
I was out for 5 days.
That's right.
and I came back Tuesday, and I was just trying to catch up. But what I did do is I did go through the last year's Kevin's presentation. I looked through it. It was pretty high level. I think most of the thing there was voiceover. Slide content.
That's true. More of supporting visuals to storytelling. I think if it's helpful, we may actually have the recording of that too. I forgot about that. If that's let's share that to Bhupinder as well.
Sure. Share that with me. And what I did was I went through the presentation yesterday, the other one that you had sent out on NPI, the 48 slides. I went through that, and then I realized that you sent me a video as well. So this morning I listened to the video. I didn't quite finish the whole thing. I think I listened to the first 20 minutes or so.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, to stop and pause and and rewind. We're talking through a lot of stuff, Richard, there.
I'm sure you're interrupted by Mr. Devine. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what did I miss? And I was going back and forth, but I went through 15, 20 minutes. That was helpful because as I was going through slides, I had questions, and as I was going through the video, some of that became easier, but I didn't finish the whole thing. So that's where I was.
Okay.
I knew in the first 20 minutes what I caught, your first 20 minutes of your presentation there, the gist was, I think, as you're, leaning into where the NPI thing comes along was a couple of things. One was the whole aspect around collaboration. So a big gap or / opportunity is collaboration between, operations and various functions in the NPI phase.
Yep.
And today, really, there are no tools around it. I mean, you mentioned there, you showed spreadsheets and, email and so on and so forth, which is so true. And we talked about it when we first started talking about NPI with you.
Yep.
So in case at Cisco, take a company, $60 billion or, $1.5 billion, it's the same problem everywhere. And I think in one of your slides, you showed how, since, I don't know what time, 2010, there has been no innovation in this whole PLM, NPI process phase. There's been no innovation, no investment in that. And that's so fucking true. I mean, we have all kinds of other things, but this, lack of investment, which is actually not huge to have, some kind of a collaborative process which encompasses and captures these various touch points in the right places. It wasn't massive, but was just overlooked.
Right.
And causes, it has huge costs. So that was one thing which this tool addresses. And the second part is the tighter connection with the sourcing, what the sourcing team is doing in the sustaining world, tying that internally into the NPI phase. And when I first started talking to Rajesh about this NPI module many months back, those were the two things I asked him were my pain points. That whole collaboration thing, it's all done on spreadsheets. So, having a tool gives us a tool to, a place, a dashboard, a space to kind of manage this whole thing holistically. And two, it puts in, whatever intelligence and, you have process and, the intelligence you've built into the sustaining, sourcing, cost optimization, and component and supplier selection early in the process. Those are two things, and I think I heard that was my takeaway first 20 minutes of listening to your video. And I think where I kind of shut it off was you were talking about, I think you kind of summed on a slide, it's bringing the sourcing and the NPI team together. And I was chuckling because I don't know if I've mentioned to you, but I took on the supplier and commodity management from Kevin last month.
Right.
So organizationally,
you've actually done that. Yeah,
we have done that. And I remember at Cisco many years back, for similar reasons, we had done that as well. I know when John Kern, he had taken on product operations had product operations, and he combined and we combined quality and commodity management under it. We used to call it PQ or something, PQS or something. But we combined those functions together for exactly the same reasons. And later we kind of reorganized around it, but we had that together for a while for exactly the same reasons. So
right.
I think that ties into the story. I can talk about what we have done organizationally and what we have through these tools and overall where the, direction is in the industry, it's exactly that. That was kind of.
No, absolutely. And so you guys have taken that step of actually formally integrating those teams, at least under one umbrella, which helps a lot, because other organizations, to your point, for different reasons don't, or it's very loosely coupled. I mean, at best we see kind of, it's anchored sort of in supply chain as a program lead team, but the process is, bringing folks together. And the biggest disconnect that we see is, at scale, every GCM can't be involved in every active program, that's under review, and, at Zebra, for example, who will be at the event. I mean, I think they've got like 71 active programs going on, and there's just no way across a 20-person, GCM team that, it's the many-to-many, problem, right? They wouldn't be able to do their day job if they had to get on every phone call for every phase gate review for 70 programs. I mean, just, and so everyone's just trying to, so what happens is you're guessing, you're reusing decisions that were made from, the last, product cycle, and, the world is changing. I mean, 12 months is a long time, it's not like, those decisions then are actually valid now. And
people are moving, right? I mean, there's much attrition in this industry in the Valley here. New people coming in, there is,
Yep, turnover, right? The talent issue is a huge problem. So all that tribal knowledge, so to speak, kind of gets lost, and then that's the sort of informal stuff that happens, where engineers have their, go-tos, and they, quickly validate something on email, and that person leaves. You know what I mean? It's sort of like there's no underlying system, that helps to capture that intelligence over time, or, provides a basis for making new recommendations, on the next cycle.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's inherently backward looking for that very reason as well. They're kind of trusting or looking at, decisions in the past versus a more of a predictive or forward-looking view. And the root cause of that we see is also because, I don't know if you've seen the same, but the sort of primary goals for the product teams are to make sure that you're hitting your time to market goals at the quality and design reliability goals that were set for the program, not necessarily like cost, dynamics at lower levels in the bill of material, or in your case, where you have kind of a primary ODM model, really, going deep into that decision from linking design and risk and cost together, right? You kind of need, a different process for balancing all those goals together and seeing what the trade-off analysis needs to be. I don't know if you guys are doing that, just because of team size and everything else, kind of better than others, but I would suspect that's probably true. At some level you can tick and tie. But anyway, we see this, to your point, we see this issue, like, no matter the company size, no matter its quote unquote, level of maturity around supply chain, it doesn't matter. This is like this weird gap that is existing out there. And it's really confusing to me, like, honestly, like, just as intellectually, just taking a step back, having been involved in supply chain for 20 plus years, just going like why? I mean, it's so weird, like how bad everyone is in this area,
True. I was thinking about that as I was listening to your video, and I don't know. I was thinking probably it is because, I've been in NPI for a while, but I think one of the reasons is, and at Cisco, I remember when, just for the time, a little after Rajesh left to start Lever Data, I had taken on, supply relationship management there, and we invested $5.5 million in building a similar capability as Lever Data in-house.
Yes, the cost management system, right? That was developed at Cisco. Yeah,
I started that there and finished it while I was there.
Yeah.
Spent all that money, and one of our focus was, to get all that information, so it gives more intelligence to the GCMs to negotiate more information on their fingertips, reduce the cycles of RFQs and whatnot going back and forth, make it real time. So there was that whole collaboration with the suppliers was a big piece. But the other part of that was also bringing that whole thing. We weren't just designing that thing for the commodity team. We were designing it for the NPI and the engineering team as users as well. So they had same visibility in making those right decisions early on in the process. We did that, and I really did that when I got out of product operations there. I didn't have time to think about spending my next 1 year building that tool. And the reason is when I'm in the NPI world, there is just that much excitement. You're building something new. You're building, you're innovating for the company, for the market. There is so much, excitement in there. You're interacting with marketing and, sales and, engineering. This thing just takes a backseat. The process and systems take a backseat. They just do. Engineering, same thing. In their development, they don't have a ton of tools. Marketing, do they have a bunch of tools to help them make good decisions? Absolutely fucking not. They're all over the place, Excel and PowerPoints is all they have. Could they use some tools to make good decisions on forecast, even on forecasts and such, which is so critical to an organization?
Yeah.
Day and night in terms of what your end results are. They don't have it because there is just so much excitement, glamour, and newness in that the system and process is like boring and takes a backseat.
Right. Well, how did the CMS system at Cisco influence the NPI process? Was it effective, or were there any lessons learned around that?
I left
right as it was
after doing it, but absolutely, as we were developing it, there was so much involvement from the NPI team. There was just so much input. There was a ton of excitement. Again, we had to pull them in. It wasn't something, really, as I said, like I started that when I moved out of product ops.
Right. Well, honestly, we've seen that system and that approach was very early in the market. It was very innovative across.
Rajesh came and pitched Leva Data, and basically told him no, because at that time you were just beginning. You didn't have the database.
Yep.
You didn't have many customers. That's your database in terms of.
Yeah.
So you didn't have much to offer.
Right.
Our spend within Cisco itself and some of the external fields we could get were much more powerful than what Leva Data had to offer. And
that's right.
Our focus was also on the collaboration, turning that whole RFQ process, which took 11, 12 weeks every quarter, into minutes. They could log on to the system. We could log on to our system from a phone in an airport, and the supplier could see what their spend was, and they could quote for the next 3 quarters and see what that would mean in spend. We could see what that mean in savings. We could change the allocation while we were talking to him on the phone, and they could immediately see what that meant to their spend, and they could offer a price. And we could just do that whole thing, which would take weeks to go back in 15 minutes, and have a very optimal solution. Great for both of us, right? We had that, and the whole NPI thing. The chunk of it was,
it's market leading. We have not come across another company that was going as far in their vision. Certainly there's a lot of, if you will, spend analytics, custom built data warehouses, that kind of thing, right? But not quite the full, going into RFQ and going into NPI. Like usually they don't kind of extend into those areas, right? And many times they have the gap of not really translating or synthesizing like external data sources into the context of their spend. It's heavily reliant on enterprise data, which is a huge issue as well, right? But it's just sort of incomplete. God, that's fascinating. So, if you kind of look at your goals for Fitbit and as a leader, so far, how would you describe what the key priorities, have been for you and the team? Some of that's got to relate to, like we said, some of the attributes of just the market that you're in, right? Shorter product life cycles, a lot of dynamics around, each generation of a product has kind of this make or break. It's a pressure cooker, environment.
Our product life cycle is 1 year, okay, and within that 1 year, I'll give an example. confidential information, but
Yeah.
we just launched Versa 2. It's been a few
Yeah.
weeks, right? A few weeks since we launched it, 3 weeks or so. And we are about to, finish about 3 million of those units in
Wow.
production. So, I mean, you could say that our product life cycle is a year. This product will, last till next fall when we introduce the next one. But really, in terms of, things we can do, you have to do it in the NPI phase because you're trying to negotiate something for Q1. I mean, we will start freeing up lines
Yeah.
end of October. Our lines will start coming off. In November, we're going to move a line out of the country because it's no longer in use. We have redundancy in our capacity. Right now, I mean, right from the launch date, I mean, we are launching it now. We started our production in end of June. I mean, everything has been running full capacity, maximum capacity, multiple lines. Every week we were bringing in lines and whatnot. And October, while we have barely launched the product, we are bringing capacity down. So that's really, even that 1 year is a fallacy because we don't have 1 year to effect change in the supply chain or rationalize or
Yeah, you have to get it right up front, right? Because it's not just time to market, it's time to volume, right? And your peak volume cycle is super loaded on the front end of the life cycle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, a side conversation, I think I've mentioned it in passing last time we talked, and I'll mention it again. In my initial conversations with the GCM team, I know what the capability, tell me this before I make that comment. What do you think are the, for sustaining, when you would pitch, forget the NPI part, when you're pitching sustaining solution, Leverator solution to a company like Fitbit, what would you say are the top 2 benefits? What are the top 2 benefits? What's the value for money for that?
Right. So it's going to be, a combination of looking at the full cost drivers kind of multidimensionally, right? So that if you, in any negotiation RFQ, and a lot of this merges in with a product RFQ at Fitbit because you have such a reliance on JDM and ODM partners. But what I mean by the value for Fitbit's business model is being able to look at cost drivers at a product header level, at a raw material input cost, and then sort of, changes at the cost, rolled up cost view, both current and then projected, right? And then your degrees of freedom, though, which is your point, of a vendor, is potentially limited depending on, the sort of what is the timing for when you're doing a negotiation. But in general, even though it's sustaining, the idea is just in general to have that kind of full, view of all the cost drivers related to the product and then the part and supplier scope, so that whenever you're doing a negotiation and or looking for reducing risk, it's not just beating up the suppliers. It's also, you also guys have strategic suppliers, design partners, and strategic suppliers. So, that value opportunity there is more around sharing maybe cost transparency and understanding, issues around ramp to lead time, et cetera. So you're monitoring that through the volume, kind of life cycle of those products. But the idea of what's sustaining it, at some point the product life cycles can be so short that there really is no sustaining. What there is sort of tracking the commonly reused components or cost drivers, and then trying to have a sourcing strategy ongoing that's the reducing that risk or optimizing those costs, maybe even across generations of products. But specifically with your last 18 months, there's been some major innovations, but also some stepping back, like Ionic versus Versa. It's funny. You know what I mean? Those were kind of different directions and different manufacturing processes, different suppliers involved, et cetera. So I think, to your point, it almost does have to get into, really it's not about sustaining, it's around optimizing at MPI, because you're almost locking in your full life cycle cost at design at MPI launch.
Got it. So if you were to summarize that for, say, our CEO, you were selling Leverator to our CEO, would you summarize it as hey, Leverator will put more information in the hands of your GCM and engineering team, or say the commodity team, so that they are more informed and they are able to optimize cost with a whole lot more vectors of information in their hands.
Intelligence, yeah.
Two is kind of manage risk and have a longer term view of supply base, components and suppliers and
Right. Right. I mean,
Uh,
because from an NPI perspective, specifically, it's about doing everything you can to improve the intelligence to reduce life cycle cost and risk,
right,
because you're locking in so much at design. I mean, it could be 80% of total cost and risk.
Yeah.
And given the volatility in supply markets right now, it's just become critically important to get more information. It's not business as usual, right? And again, it's not about beating up the suppliers
Right.
as much as it's tracking what those ongoing risk drivers are. Because if you think about the sourcing process, there's an influence in your kind of category strategy, and then there's an influence in the sourcing strategy, and then there's an influence in the negotiation levers that you use. So, even though you have very short product life cycles and you're not just kind of going out to do sustaining RFQs every quarter on a product that might be, in market for 3 years or something, it is critically important to have better intelligence and to scale across a greater supply base from a coverage perspective when you have a limited team. So part of that also is agility, right? So it's improving the time, the analysis cycle time, et cetera. Like to your point at, the old RFQ cycle time at Cisco, right? Same concept, right? It's making, from, trying to capture and synthesize all this information instead of building a spreadsheet and kind of going through this phase gate, this sort of sequential process that initially at Fitbit took, 3.5 months really to complete just for a sourcing strategy, right? A category strategy and sourcing strategy combined, and then you get ready for an actual negotiation, right? The idea is to move all of that down to, days and iterations, that get you ready. So it's about cycle time reduction, it's about cost and risk reduction, and it's about agility, moving much faster than competitors. Because I honestly think that how Fitbit is performing, even though there's a ton of market dynamics, right, that you guys can't exactly control. I mean, you got lots of shifting consumer behavior, and there's this kind of brand sort of shifting going on, right? It's not sticky enough, with a lot of the demographics of different Fitbit user communities. But if you just take a step back, I believe that Fitbit is outperforming Apple in the same, in the wearables and the watch space, with a team that's 100 times larger at Apple than Fitbit.
Agree.
And I think that's a really, really exciting story. And I think it's only possible. It's not just about Levitate, but it's only possible with the right mindset, the right approach to kind of, you know what I mean? Like look at how you scale, insight and data capture and information to be as intelligent as possible, and scale your coverage, right, as much as possible with a limited team. Because Apple, as you may know, runs through spreadsheets, runs by putting like their own people in, almost vertically integrated upstream at key suppliers, but they don't really have a system approach. It's very control oriented, with a lot of Excel spreadsheets where they're trying to measure and track everything. They're not dynamically looking at intelligence around everything. They just feel like they can, own it and control it, if they've got that coverage. But but if it's things that are outside of their direct vertically integrated control, they actually aren't really good, other than having huge volumes, so they just have a lot of leverage, right? But it's not like they're really smart about what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's they throw a lot of people at the problem. Yeah. So there's a David and Goliath story there. I mean, just personally for me, that's what's kind of exciting to see play out.
Yeah, true. You mentioned 3 things earlier in that sequence. You said, last one was negotiation levers, then was, the sourcing strategy. And what was the first one you said?
Category or commodity strategy. So, in general, category management as a discipline is like very well structured in industries like consumer products. You know what I mean? Because you've got the P&Gs of the world, right? Will have their brand and their category teams, and they go through an annual category management process, and it's kind of heavy and very analytically driven. In high tech, the idea of doing an annual commodity strategy that then is separate from your sourcing strategy is not really common. They're kind of merged together. But the point is that the decisions you're trying to make at a category or commodity level is, hey, these are the 5 main drivers, that are strategically important about what's happening in this commodity, right? We've got capacity changes, we've got, overall lead times increasing, we've got, risks among, these major suppliers in that group. And then the sourcing strategy then is the more specific set of decisions. You're saying, okay, around, this portfolio of spend, we're going to diversify our suppliers. We're going to have like these minimum TAM allocations. We're going to try to see if we can diversify out of China, for example. So we're weaving in or building out capacity at a new alternate supplier. That's the sourcing strategy drivers. And then the negotiation is actually when you're going through the RFQ process and what levers you're positioning with those suppliers to say, hey, this is what we're seeing. We think these are the opportunities. Let's align on this, right? Let's not just look at cost, but let's look at volume targets and, commitments on, on locking in maybe price or lead time commits, as part of the negotiation, right? To lock in that sourcing event. And that's really kind of where there's leverage, from the platform, the Levidator platform in those 3 areas. Does that make sense?
Got it. So, tell me, how does Levidator help on the sourcing strategy?
So we're looking at both existing supplier spend. So you're looking at all your Pareto analysis, right? On, let me analyze. Okay, across this portfolio spend, what's my supplier allocation? What's my projected forecast? How is that allocation or that shift in volume going to change, right? And then also, what's the underlying spend or cost drivers across those sets of suppliers? And then, oh, by the way, what's other intelligence around the suppliers that I need to know, right? And so, some of the things that we're doing very recently is adding like Resolink risk, event watch data and event history for each of those suppliers. We're adding in rapid ratings to understand financial health and risk, for those suppliers. And all of those are factors that you really want to consider before you move into the actual negotiation, right? And that's the sourcing strategy plan.
Okay. Cool. And the financial information through rapid ratings or anywhere else is not there in the system right now?
Not today, but I mean, honestly, like we're launching it either at the Economic Sourcing Summit or just after, right? We're just onboarding that right now.
Okay, got it. Cool. So the aside I was going to mention to you earlier was when I talked to the commodity team recently since taking over. I think I mentioned this last time.
Yeah.
I said, so how are you guys using Levadata? Like, how is that helping? We were talking about some cost reductions, especially in light of the tariffs and whatnot.
Yeah.
The answer I got was that we're using Levadata as a glorified spreadsheet to put our quotes in. That's it. So unfortunately, and this is
that's really strange,
For us, it's a bad on our part that we are paying for a service and we are not scratching the surface of using it. So my commitment to you, and I'm looking for a similar help back from you, is
absolutely. Yeah. No.
I want to get together and figure out and challenge my team to leverage the capabilities that you have and ask for more actually versus
absolutely
this, and we were asked to use it and we are using it. I mean, that was, and I've talked to some of the smartest people in the team, and that was the answer. They have no clue. So
I'm not close enough to it, but do you know what, based on the feedback, is there any correlation with the tenure of the team? Because I know you've had some turnover and some mix, right? Some folks have stuck around, and then there's been some new players come in. I'm just curious.
No, I'm not talking about people who are here for 3 months. I mean, these are people who have been here for 2+ years longer than I have. So
okay, I just wanted to clarify because I'm not sure if it's just the normal they haven't had time to go deep, et cetera. Okay,
yeah, and
that's very strange.
Don't take it as a negative comment. I'm really bringing this up. I mean, I believe in. I mean, I've told you I spent $5.5 million at Cisco building a similar capability.
Yes, yeah.
This totally. I mean, this is just a wake-up call for me and for us. And really, I take more of a fault on Fitbit side to. I mean, if you're paying for something and not using it, it's it's foremost our fault. But I'll need your help.
I think there's a couple things that we should do, right? One is just re-engage with a kind of an education and broader discussion with the team. There's also, a a little bit of remapping in their current process cycle where the leverage points are with Leviday that they may not be using. Do you know what I'm saying? Because when we go, one area I know going back a couple years that we impacted dramatically was the ability to, just from a spend visibility perspective, automate the ability to understand, product, market volume, and then the splits by supplier and projected and current costs. Like that whole process was taking something like 7 weeks, and then there was this like massive Excel spreadsheet of all the validation steps that each GCM had to go to, and we collapsed that cycle time down to like 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, it was like serious compression of time. But then the other part of it was using opportunity, and cost drivers to analyze and drive outcomes. I mean, we identified $30 million in opportunities, and $7.4 million were acted upon and committed in 3 sourcing events in 2018 or late 2017. I mean, we documented that. So what I'm really confused about is, for those who are saying we're not getting value, it's a glorified spreadsheet, there's a massive disconnect from what we actually were tracking for, what we actually measure on the platform and what was actually acted upon. So we should really get at the heart of that gap, because I think the reality is different from what you're hearing. But obviously, if that's what they're telling you, then that's reality, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that, right? I mean, clearly that's where the buck stops. I mean,
so we'll fix that. I mean, because and exactly the point. I mean, we'll re-engage, quickly find out, do a very quick re-education, and these are smart people.
Absolutely.
And the onus would be on them to leverage it with your help. But yeah, we'll get there.
Well, the good news is there's a whole wave of new capabilities that are coming on board too. You know what I mean? So like, I'm sure there's a way to kind of get them more excited about new stuff that's coming, and and all that. But I mean, I really hear you. I mean, I really appreciate your help to kind of re-engage on that and really kind of get clarity around where the value drivers are and get their perspective really captured.
Absolutely. I believe in the platform and in that whole approach, and we just need to make it work. Absolutely. And that's why I asked you before I made that comment as to, what are the top 2 things you would say, and obviously the top 2 things that you said you would sell Leviday on is not the organization, the dashboard capability, which is kind of, an enhanced Excel, but it is really the intelligence that you bring in.
Yeah. I mean, there's the other
in the risk management and that part, if they're not using, then we are missing the point, right?
And well, in the RFQ management is the other area that is really critical.
And absolutely. Cool. So we'll figure that out. I mean, no hurry today, but we'll hurry up on that soon after. So for the purpose of this presentation, I think what we are talking about is the whole capability. It's the NPI thing is really, the way I see it is, there is that collaboration piece that it brings to the NPI, which is again not the main thing we want to talk about. The main thing we want to talk about is, we want to mention that, but the main thing is that we are bringing all that intelligence and the information that you are bringing through the tool early in the process. So the way I would think we should structure that presentation for that day would be, we don't segregate it as to what you had and the NPI thing as an add-on. We kind of combine it and talk through it. I would love to talk through it in a holistic way, saying, hey, these are the capabilities, and as I talk about it, talk about how we had that, this is all important. And then I say, but in a life cycle like ours and for most of the industry, it absolutely, you kind of undermine the whole value of this whole effort by not bringing it early in the process. And I can give examples on our case, how the ramp happens and so on and so forth, where it opportunity ends. And so talk about that and the importance of having it early kind of together as I go through slides. Now, looking through, the slides that I went through this morning, I think some of those challenges, we could use some of, we shouldn't use the exact same slides, but I think we can use a similar structure. So if you can help put a similar structure, because everything I was seeing through then rang true for Fitbit. Like
Right.
first
Yeah.
20 minutes, I mean, everything was ringing true for us. Those
Yeah.
Excel spreadsheets, the sourcing decisions, 20%, like 20% involvement of sourcing. I mean, that whole thing, everything rang true. So if we can take that same gist and, with a Fitbit spin on it, if you guys can help me with
Yeah.
that. But combine what you had with the Kevin's presentation a little bit, your core capabilities and that. So we're not just talking about, bringing it sooner. I talk about the capabilities and that thing combined.
That works great. The other kind of angle that I think would be really interesting is to just in general comment on your view of if you're going to do everything you can to minimize the life cycle cost and risk. What is the intelligence that's needed now, or what is the capability that's needed, or what are the risk drivers now that's changing? You know what I mean? Because it could be related to raw material. It could be related to obviously sources of supplies. You're trying to diversify outside of China, and ramp up new supplier capacity. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but whatever that, just that picture, right, of like kind of, as you build out and try to improve the intelligence, like what would you want to inject into when you're analyzing and doing bill of material comparisons, and or, risk weighting the bills of material, like what would those factors be that are so important,
So,
to Fitbit or you?
So you want to tell you now so you can help?
Yeah, capturing it now.
Story? Okay. So one of the things is, and I'll tell you anecdotally, we were having a conversation with a memory supplier yesterday with, the Toshiba spin-off, the Toshiba group. They were here, and the key thing with them, I mean, they're capable, they're industry leading and whatnot. But when they asked us the same question as to, what do you really need from us, is what we were looking from them was a longer term view of where, the various technologies were going, and also a commitment on a longer term, right? Because when we start engagement, when we start designing something, which is kind of they have right now, we have a platform approach where we take one thing and, although it lasts a year, we take quite a few of those components into the next one. We have a platform. Right. So we wanted that visibility. So we were making the right design choices. So we don't have to do disruptive work between that, the 2 years of leveraging that platform, but also get their commitment. So same thing. If, we'll get that from suppliers directly, but if Lever Data can help, I don't know if it does today. Besides, I mean, if it gives us a longer term view, 2 to 4 years out in terms of, what the market usage is going to be, if something is going to be phasing out, gives us that view. For example, taking memory, for example, you're talking about 2D NAND, 4 gig 2D NAND, where that thing is going. Is it going to cliff off? I mean, for example, that one is going to cliff off in 2020, 2021. It's kind of going away right now. It looks like, I don't know, that whole thing could change, but that's an important information for us to, bring to bear in our design decisions. And I mean, yesterday's meeting with Toshiba was eye-opening because we were about to kind of embark on some wrong decisions. So we engaged with them, and we're going to have another meeting with them next week.
That's a great example, but quick question. So one of the things that we're seeing is there's sort of some assumptions around general technology trends.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's commitment from suppliers, but oftentimes when you're going through like a product scope RFQ or just like called an RFI, you're just having a, like you said, just a roadmap kind of alignment discussion with a key supplier. That information is not being well captured. So one of the things that we're looking to do is extend the information model way beyond what's normally in an RFQ. Right. So when you're bidding on something, you're actually getting, okay, what's your view of the probability of, capacity shortages? What's your, view of the lead time or, changes, or what's the view of the technology life cycle for this category, right? That these parts are in, because that information, like third-party information, does not capture that effectively. Like IHS Markit data is way out of whack. Distributor data varies. It's very accurate on some standard components. It's just very inaccurate for different reasons for other stuff that's under key capacity constraints. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you have to kind of build the intelligence in there, because that's kind of where you get a lot smarter quickly. But anyway, that's one of the ideas there, is how you get that longer lead time view, technology roadmap view.
You're saying you would have you're extending capabilities of information capture within Lever Data. So when we're doing RFQ, there are fields to capture that. So that's fantastic. You're absolutely right. I mean, that information from those meetings remains in people's minds or email meeting minutes. And that would be very powerful. But the second part is, so it's great you're doing that. The second part would be, as part of just market intelligence, could you have that information in Lever Data?
We do, right? So we'll have a predictive view, for example, even on like, interesting commodities, like just DRAM, we're looking at memory, but it's the classic DRAM curve, right? So it's, we've got this, probability frontier from an analytics perspective, that prediction that's saying, we think it's a 70% probability that the inflection point or the dip, you know what I mean, in terms of like, capacity or lowest price at the sub-commodity level will be in this zone. But what you want to do is you want to add like the specific supplier view, particularly for like a little bit more specialized, within memory, for example, and then compare. Because what our data science team is doing is understanding what is highly correlated, has positive or negative correlation. Because either way, it's really interesting, right? If you have an outlier that's negatively correlated, that's really interesting. Why is that supplier, that price, that lead time not responding to the group?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that tells you a lot. And MLCC is an area where that really played out, and folks got really surprised, because you had very different supplier-specific capacity reallocations by market shift, that was not captured at all in general, MLCC average prices.
Predictions. Are you basing that? What are those predictions? How are you making those predictions? Are they just based on data analytics, or is it also based on some information polls, for example? And I don't know, you probably don't want to do that or not planning to do that, but for example, you add that field, and whenever we are having our RFIs, we are filling that information. Would Lever Data take that information from data mine that information from Fitbit's RFIs in a confidential way, and from other RFIs with other companies, and kind of transform into a benign piece of information that's available to everybody? Because
that's how the community intelligence works, right? That's totally the right way of thinking about it. So it's if there is data trends or elements, right, that can, they need to, we do some pre-massaging, right? So it has to be anonymized, aggregated, and then statistically distributed, right? So you never can see any specific relationship between a buyer and a supplier.
Right.
But we also are looking at other third-party information, and both at a sub-commodity and then linking that to parts, right? Because we have a taxonomy, a Lever Data taxonomy that allows us to look at kind of top-down and bottom-up trends and then see what the relationships are. And basically, we have kind of we have 14 different prediction forecasting models, essentially, that work on, both different data series, data types, and then we compare those 14 and then pick best, essentially, what we think is the most accurate over time, because we're constantly comparing, what was the prediction and then what was actual, right? And it's self-tuning the model over time. That's really powerful stuff, because what happens is you get this kind of derived intelligence that's much, much better than any one individual company can get on their own.
Yeah, that's a big, and especially smaller companies like us, we kind of have to use. So even we will get that kind of information doing RFIs and meeting with the suppliers. But even before that, I mean, as I said, before we had that meeting yesterday with Toshiba, we were working for a while on a path, and we did some course corrections based on our discussions, and they are doing some course corrections. But having that information, so even if conceptually the engineer is thinking about something, they can pull up Lever Data and get some directional views, and then we can get more specifics and verify that and all that. So that's one example, building into what we need, and just a real example. The other one along the same lines, a different category is raw materials you mentioned. I mean, it's similar kind of a view around, like, I'll talk bands, for example. So we use TPU and silicon bands, right? Silicon bands are a little more expensive. We, for most of our new products, we're using silicon bands. Apple uses a silicon band, but their silicon, I'm forgetting the name. I'll send you the name, but they're using a much more expensive kind of silicon, like X times more than us. And with our price point, we can't afford it. But we're constantly looking at that, and we're constantly looking at other sources, other kind of material which has similar characteristics. We're looking for those. What are the trends? What are the things coming? And we are looking at the price trends of that particular raw material that they're using, because we want to see, okay, where is that trend going, and where can we intersect with that? So if the usage, technology, and those cost trends on that are going this way, maybe 2 years from now we can intersect and use that. So let's figure out a problem is for the immediate 2 years, we say, okay, we can use this and do this, or we can take a cost hit for 2 years and that will be this much, and if it's worth it. So that kind of information on raw materials, and especially, for our products, a lot of cost is in custom mechanicals or electromechanicals. So bands, housings, display. Those are the biggest, that's a big cost factor.
Absolutely.
Also, those are very important design factors for our product, for a consumer product that goes in your wrist. I mean, how the housing is, the display and band are, super important for a consumer. So,
Got it.
But on these, unlike memory or unlike passives and such, we can't do cost comparisons. I mean, Lever can't tell us, hey, this housing should cost $8 instead of 10. It can't tell us that. But what it can tell us is, what's happening in terms of, maybe labor and, cost of specific processes, raw material for sure. And I think raw material is a key one. But, maybe the anodization process, some more things to be added there, because for consumer goods, ours, Apple Watch, phones, I mean, what's on the outside of the device is a major component of the cost, and it is a key IDN market factor for the consumer. So trying to think of more ways that you can companies to, make sourcing and,
I mean, our view on that is it's always a triangulation. You're not going to have apples to apples, right? Obviously, right? That's a bad analogy, apples to apples, oranges to oranges. But what you can do is like you said, look at the cost drivers for both header cost, so that's your labor, your transformation cost, trends, again, you're getting into tooling or process costs that you're trying to model. What I call is it's really lightweight should cost. It's very operational should cost, right? And then you're looking at like raw material input costs. That's another triangulation point. The only third leg of the stool that we see that's interesting as well is, using those in more negotiation levers to get better outcomes or better visibility with those key design partners and single source suppliers. So some of that depends on a little bit if you've got some flexibility at an engineering or MPI level to look more strategically at options as alternates, right, for suppliers, because the ramp up is going to take a while for them. Really, really critical to get to quality and their technology readiness, even more than just cost. You know what I mean? It's not like a switch in, switch out kind of relationship, but if you also look then at risk and financial drivers, you're reducing the overall risk of that kind of concentration of spend with those key suppliers. So in our view, that's kind of the best you can do right now, and then if you, in the RFQ process, if you can identify other things which are really important to you to capture, and you start modeling that, then you start getting more intelligence over time. But really, when you start, that's the stuff you can get your hands around, wrapped around, early on in the process. And that's kind of our approach or the methodology is to build a risk model and a cost driver model for each bill of material when it's either in design phase or it's kind of in a phase gate review, iteration, as you're going through. And our view is that those cost and risk drivers will evolve and expand over time, as you get more information.
Yeah, agree. Tell me this, you mentioned should cost, light should cost. Is there a plan in the horizon somewhere to have lighter should cost models as
Yes. Yeah, there's two things that we're doing. One is building out a more general purpose cost attribute based modeling. So you kind of can do call it semi-custom, right? Definition of what those cost attributes are that attach to, for example, a product, or it could even attach to another dimension like a subcommodity group. But it's at the product level where we think that's really important. The other part of it is that we're looking at actually partnering with some third-party models for this is kind of the a prioris of the world, or
Yeah.
PCBA, you have
Totally,
consultancies that have expertise on, 40 layer versus 11 layer models for PCB, you know what I mean? Modeling, right, of cost.
Might be an easy one for you to start with because that is at least got a fixed set of attributes. A priori, which does mechanical parts, that's a little more complex. You can have a linkage into lever data, but I remember we were using, so while we were doing this whole thing around the cost model at Cisco, was also building capability around should cost. So that was kind of a separate and trying to plug it in. And we did plug it in into the cost tool. But we were using a priori for mechanicals. But for PCBs, we actually had, there was a guy in my team who actually built that thing because he came from the PCB industry. He knew, so he built it in Excel. And that's what we were using. And that was super helpful. So that could be something that you could actually build in.
Exactly. So it's that idea, right, of attaching whatever it is, right? It could be a third-party consultancy. A PCBA is like this, a classic example, right? You've got a lot of experts in this area. And mechanicals, we're talking a priori, we're not really sure where that's going to go. But the idea, though, is just from a design perspective, a lot of those should cost models are very static. And, some of that's totally fine because, you are just trying to do some offline analysis kind of from a value engineering perspective. But what I mean by being operational is sometimes those should cost models go way down to a level of detail that's almost like over-engineered, and you actually can't even compare specific or get visibility on quotes from specific suppliers that try to match whatever that should cost is. So you end up kind of, compromising it. But the other really important aspect is that there's a life cycle dimension to cost for many of these models. So what's really important is to understand, like on PCBA, not the static view of the model, but the attributes that you're actually actively tracking over the life cycle of when you sourced with those suppliers. Because, think of it as like the embedded, economy of scale or learning curve or tool amortization or utilization online will shift what the cost profile is for that specific PCBA that you're sourcing from. So the life cycle factors is what everyone is flying blind on right now. It's really, really hard to track that. And so that's kind of what we're trying to figure out, is how to design the time-based factors with the static cost attributes that you would have in the should cost itself. And this is something that Adil Najmi is our new chief product officer. So he's come on board along with Suresh, who I think you may know from Cisco on MPI, and they're mapping that out right now. It's actually really exciting stuff.
Cool. Ask Suresh to stop by sometimes if he's in the
Yes,
city.
I know for sure.
Hey, I have to run. I'm
okay
for a meeting, but so for this presentation, I think the way I see it is, I'll say what you tell me to say. I'll, of course, I think I'm aligned with everything you are saying, at least, our conversation and listening to a video. So, but, I understand it's to your customers. So, help me put that together, and hopefully, you got some points and, correlations with our business and where I and my team are thinking, where Fitbit is thinking, and you can help tailor that. Let's spend some time next week, but in between, whoever is working on it, if they have any questions, don't even wait for a meeting. Let's set up something for next week, maybe 1 or 2 half-an-hour sessions. But somebody's got a question. Hopefully you have my text number. If not, I'll send you my phone number. Have somebody text me and I can call you back for a quick Q&A for a few minutes.
That works great. We'll build an outline from our discussion. We'll create some visuals that are kind of generic, and then that'll allow you to create the Fitbit, anecdotes woven in. Do you know what I mean? The specific examples. We'll take that approach. And then if you can share, I don't know if I've got your phone number, but that is super helpful to have.
It's 408.
Yep.
202-6648.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
You too. So like anybody, if you have any questions in between, feel free to reach me evenings, weekends, whenever, and I'll call you right back. Okay.
You're the best. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Cheers.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.